Hello and welcome to the Get French Football News preview show for today, April 13th, 2017. I'm Eric Devin, and joining me are Nathan Stables and Adam White. Before we look ahead to Matchday 33, though, we will take a brief look back at the European adventures of Monaco and Lyon. Adventures was certainly an apt description for the way that both of these teams' matches went. Monaco had traveled to Dortmund and earned an entertaining but sloppy win over the hosts 3-2, with Kylian Mbappe netting a brace last night, and the return leg is scheduled for Wednesday at the Stade Louis II. And in a match which just concluded after being delayed some 45 minutes due to crowd trouble, Lyon earned a 2-1 comeback win over Besiktas. So, gents, let's get started with last night's encounter at the Westfalenstadion. Before we approach the match at hand, both of you, should it have gone ahead? Was this a matter of money or simply of lack of options given the DFB Pokal is midweek the last week of the month? Are there parallels to be drawn from the past and other events that give your belief credence one way or the other? Nathan, I'll start with you.
It's super tough. I don't think the game should have been played. I sympathise a lot with the Dortmund players and what was a traumatic event. I mean, you just have to watch the interview with Nuri Sahin with young Arne Fjord after the game that they weren't ready. Reports today that they were told about the nails in the back of the headrests about 5 hours before the game, which puts in perspective that it could have been a lot worse than it was. They were very lucky that the only sort of outcome of it was Mark Bartra's injury, but it's not. It's going to shake you. Excuse me. There's no doubt about that, and I think it's tough at the same time because, like you mentioned, the footballing schedule, especially at this time of the year, is so tight, so neatly wrapped that it's so difficult to fit the games in. Not only because, like you say, Dortmund, obviously, I think they have 9 games in April, so they've had to fit a lot of football in one section. Monaco obviously still in every competition as well, so they don't really have a midweek free either. It becomes the problem of where you schedule the game, and in all honesty, UEFA maybe should have taken more time on that. The positive thing from their point of view is at least there's no foreign tournament happening at the end of the season. Maybe we just nudge a couple of things back. It's such a tough thing though, and it's such an awkward situation for the UEFA to schedule. But I don't think it's a money thing necessarily because again, scheduling where it is the problem, not the money side of it, because they have enough to fix any issues. They earn enough, they will get enough revenue from the game full stop. But it clearly affected the game. It clearly affected the players, and Thomas Tuchel has every right to be thoroughly annoyed, not only with the UEFA, but I think Dortmund's hierarchy that clearly probably went over his head in the decision of playing the game. So on balance, they shouldn't have played it, but at the same time, you can understand why they had to play it.
Adam, what about you? I mean, Dortmund had expressed some disappointment that they were told via a text message from Switzerland, i.e. UEFA headquarters, that they weren't really consulted on the match. I mean, perhaps moving it would have been an alternative as well as a safety precaution, moving it elsewhere in Germany, maybe to Gelsenkirchen or to Hamburg. But what is your take on the match being played?
Yeah, I have to agree with Nathan. I think that I would have liked to have seen it delayed for a number of reasons. I think Nathan's absolutely right. I think it was probably a scheduling issue given how hectic this period of the season is, especially for these two clubs who are in, semi-finals of cups and quarter-finals of cups, and that would take a lot of rearranging of games. But I think that would have been worth the trouble. I mean, because it was potentially such a horrific incident, and obviously the Dortmund team having to play 24 hours immediately afterwards would have affected them. So apart from anything else, it seems a bit unfair on Borussia Dortmund to make them play so soon afterwards. Even if you can look past any of the trauma they would have experienced, or how scared they probably would have been at what was potentially which was potentially such a sort of horrific. It could have been a really horrific thing, and it was still obviously very, very frightening and very, very sort of very difficult to deal with from their point of view nonetheless. So I think from that point of view, I think a bit more consideration could have been taken from that point of view for the Dortmund players and for the club in general, and arrangements could have been made to move fixtures for their, even just to to give them the chance to sort of move on a little bit, so they're sort of in the right frame of mind to play for what is a very important game. And I think that's what Monaco would have been fine with. I think Dortmund would have preferred as a squad, at least. Perhaps the hierarchy had different ideas, but UEFA had different ideas. But I think the priority here should have been the mental preparedness of the Dortmund team and the Dortmund club, the fans and the club as a whole. And I'm not sure that was considered wholly, given the short period of time they were given to recover and to sort of get themselves prepared for this game, given how horrific that event could have been. Obviously it was relatively minor in comparison to perhaps what was planned, but I would have liked to have seen the Dortmund squad and their mental preparedness given priority in at least a week, and have to rearrange around. I think scheduling is annoying, but it can be done. I think Dortmund as a team and a squad should have been prioritised, and I sort of feel for them a little bit that they had to play the game last night, because I think they definitely would have been affected and definitely looked like they were affected. So perhaps a little bit more consideration at least could have been taken for their sort of mental well-being and let them prepare for the game properly again. It's a shame, but I think UEFA could have been a little bit more sensitive in that regard.
Certainly, I think there would have been no objections to perhaps bumping their respective cup semifinals into May and playing it that midweek, just reversing the order of the fixtures or something like that. It's not that there weren't options; it was just a matter of unilaterality on the part of UEFA that I think has left a lot of us with a bad taste in our mouths.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll say that there is some positives to be taken from this match. It was really nice to see Dortmund fans working together to find accommodations for Monaco's traveling party. Saw a lot of pictures on Twitter of people wearing the two teams' jerseys, having dinner together and sharing a beer and giving it a thumbs up. And also some Monaco fans with none too subtle tributes to Marc Bartra, who should be fine, by the way. He does have, I believe, a broken arm, but should be back ready to go at least by the beginning of next season. So now to the match itself. Perhaps a little bit ragged, a little bit wild. Not that we didn't expect that, but just not exactly the level of precision and dynamism that we might expect from both of these teams when they are playing at their very best. So, Nathan, I want to start with you. Let's look at the tactics. Thomas Tuchel had been tipped to start with a 4-1-4-1 that ended up being a 3-4-2-1 maybe to start the match with
3-4-1-2, I'd say.
3-4-1-2. Okay, so Dembele is a striker, Kagawa playing off of the pair of them. But again, whatever you want to call it, how badly did he get it wrong? Part one, and part two. Should Monaco? How could Monaco have adapted to the changes that he did make at the interval?
Yeah, I think for starters, we preface this in the can of obviously what we've talked about before. Obviously, that affects it as well. But I also do think that with the players that Dortmund's got, I don't understand Tuchel's formation. Like, I've watched Dortmund a few times this season, and I regularly watch the highlights and bits like that. And while that obviously never tells a full picture, they have struggled for goals, which what is seemingly why he pushes so many forward. My main issue is with the central areas. I thought that in the first half, having Rafael Guerreiro next to Julian Weigl left too many areas exposed, if you understand, especially when the first goal comes from it. They have Schmelzer and Matthias Ginter, who is a strange footballer. I don't get if he's a right back. I don't think he's a centre back. I don't know where I'd play him. But they were both far advanced in that first goal. And Rafael Guerreiro tended to join in the attacks at that later stage because he's almost playing he should be playing as box-to-box, but he's not particularly defensive-minded as we've seen at Lorient in the past. So that left Julian Weigl on an island. And then Socrates just seems so distant to the other two centre-backs as well. He almost seems like he's on his own almost. And that was a real pressure for him around someone like Mbappe, who was running around him, and Falcao obviously offering an option as well. They were just... it didn't really match with what Monaco did. As for the changes and for that first half, they were just never seemed like they were going to be a danger. They never seemed to get it into Dembele or Aubameyang, and there was no movement in behind. And then second half, that changes with Pulisic, who completely changed the game for Dortmund. He was excellent, as he always seems to be at the moment, getting, like I mentioned, it in behind, tormenting someone like Raji, who, bloody hell, it looked like he'd walked through cement during halftime and decided that cinder blocks would be better for boots because you could walk past him. But Monaco needed to adapt to that better. Yeah, I agree with that, because for the second half, they allowed Dortmund a lot of possession in the first half, but in the second half, they allowed them too much room, too much time to organise attacks and do it in a structured way where they weren't caught on the counter as often. Monaco's passing then became more sloppy. They lost the outballs. And in all honesty, they were possibly a little bit lucky to get that third goal that's probably going to just about see them through, I think, because away goals is massive in this tie. But Monaco should have done more. They should have really seen out this game, because once they started to get in behind, they needed to sit maybe a little bit deeper. They maybe needed to... They brought Dirar on at a good time, I thought, but he didn't really affect it as much as I'd hoped he would. Lemar probably didn't realise his issues too often enough. Maybe they should have communicated on the pitch and switched so Dirar could help Raji. Maybe Fabinho as well, covering that side rather than the other side. They could have tweaked things a little bit better, but regardless of that, they'll be delighted with the result.
Yeah, I don't think we could disagree with that. Just being a bit hamstrung there without Bakayoko. Now, Adam, coming to you, the tie is obviously far from over, even though Monaco do have that lead and 3 away goals. But with Marco Reus potentially available, Tuchel having a better sense of how to counter Monaco's 4-4-2, and not only that, but the host will be lacking Fabinho in the second leg. We saw how important he can be for that team and how poorly Monaco had played in the Coupe de la Ligue final. Is this lead safe for Monaco? And if so, or if not, how should this team adapt come next Wednesday?
I think firstly, I don't think it is safe. It's obviously an extremely good first leg lead, being 3 away goals ahead in the tie, away at what is a very difficult place to go. Obviously with extenuating circumstances for this particular game, but still 3-2 win at Dortmund is an extremely good result for Monaco, and that they would have very much taken that before the game, obviously. But given the way both these teams play and the fact they're both kind of freewheeling attacking teams, and as we see with Monaco as well defensively in Dortmund last night, perhaps capable of errors and both capable of scoring lots of goals between them, that the second leg, as we saw with Manchester City, who play in obviously in a very similar way too, the second leg could be any score. So 1 goal lead is relatively fine, even though there are 3 away goals for Monaco. So I really don't think the game is very much far from safe. But it's obviously a very good position for Monaco to be in terms of how they should play. Fabinho, as you said, is a massive miss. Andres Clavijo, who works with me as my colleague at Football Radar for Liga, and sings Fabinho's praises on a weekly basis. He would tell you that he's easily their most important player. And without him, as you mentioned, in the Coupe de Ligue final, they it really showed the amount of work he gets through, the presence, the sheer presence and ability he has to control that midfield, especially in a 4-4-2 when both wider players, Lemar and Silva, are so attacking, and perhaps there's with 2 men in there they can get outnumbered sometimes. But Fabinho, much like we've seen N'Golo Kante do for Chelsea and perhaps for Leicester last year, who played a similar 4-4-2 at times, he kind of makes up for the lack of an extra player, if you like. So without him, it's going to be a huge miss. The only thing you need to balance here is, without him, do they need to change their style to accommodate his absence, if you like, and does that rid them of what makes Monaco Monaco? So, and even as good as Fabinho is, what makes Monaco great is that 4-4-2 that they attack, that they press. And if they switch to a 4-4-1-1 or even a 4-2-3-1 and change shape to accommodate the absence of Fabinho, is there sort of a threshold of diminishing returns there? Are they getting to the point where it's although they're trying to cover up for Fabinho, they're affecting themselves by doing so? So if you did go with, say, Bernardo Silva centrally and perhaps play one of Falcao and Mbappe, that's probably one way around it. But I think even though, Bakayoko will be back for that game, I was very impressed with João Martinho. We know he's a good player, but that run for the first goal, he's a very, very good replacement. So I think they kind of have to stick to their guns and they have to play that attacking style, keep the 4-4-2, and sort of transport João Moutinho in there instead of Fabinho, and play the way Monaco know they can play and know they can win. At home with Falcao and Mbappe, it'll be as good as atmospheres go at the Stade Louis II, which isn't amazing, but it would be full, and it would be very much a big occasion there for as Stade Louis has not puts the Westbound Stadium in terms of atmosphere, but even so, I think they should stick to their guns and play that 4-4-2 and win the way they know how to win. I think changing the style would be risky at least, given how well they've played in that 4-4-2. João Martinho is a very good player, so I think they kind of have to stick to their guns here.
All right, so 100% agree with everything you've just said, but sticking with you, Adam, a little bit of devil's advocate here. That system, I think Nathan would agree with this as well. That system works so well because of the dynamism that we see from Benjamin Mendy and Djibril Sidibe. Now, if those two are still not fit to go, you're forced to go with Raji and Toure again. Do you still press on with this 4-4-2, especially given how poor Raji looked in that second half?
He did. He's not the same. He's not the same type of player as either as Toure. I think is actually a very good stand-in, but he's not the same type of player as any of those three, Sidibe and Mendy included, of course. Perhaps there's a shout for playing Nabil Dirar at right back if they really wanted to go attacking. Toure at left back, Dirar perhaps still right back. If they really wanted to keep that kind of freewheeling pressing style to go toe to toe for Dortmund, perhaps there's a case for that. I personally think Raji's a centre back at best, really, and a little bit old, and perhaps this is an area of Monaco's squad they need to look at in the summer, because just having Raji as good a seven he's been for Monaco, I think that they need perhaps at least one, probably two centre backs in as reinforcements. So yes, if they want to keep Raji as fullback, perhaps they do need a little bit more protection. But again, is that inviting Dortmund onto them? If they go Raji at right back and Dirar ahead of him, move Bernardo Silva inside, is that asking for trouble? Is that asking to concede goals? I know that they're not the most solid defensively. Obviously, Glick and Jemison, I thought Jemison was good last night overall. They're good defenders, but Monaco are still relatively porous, especially against bigger teams. So robbing them of a little bit of their attacking potential to perhaps shore up a defensive situation that is going to be creaky anyway, perhaps seems a little bit counterproductive. But it's a difficult call, and I would like to be Jardim going into that game, because I think it's sort of, depending on the result, it's sort of damned if you don't, isn't it, a little bit. But I'd like to see them stick to their sort of philosophy and go 4-4-2, and that's the right back. It's a little bit long shot, but it's an option perhaps.
I do believe he's played there in the past, not often.
Yeah, he has. Yeah.
Nathan, your thoughts if Mendy and Sidibe aren't fit? I mean, we know how important they are going forward. Mendy in particular has been, in a handful of matches, Monaco's standout performer in this competition. Well, how would you look to set things up for next Wednesday if those two are unavailable?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I do want to quickly mention that I thought while he was very poor defensively, especially in the second half, Raji, he did do some good things in the other half of the field and put in some good crosses and bits like that, which is really important to the way Monaco play. Which is why it's also interesting. I thought Adam made a really good point that Dirar in that position might be an interesting one, because while he might not be as, let's say, savvy a defender as Raji and more aware of his defensive position, his speed might make up for that compared to what we saw in the second half against Dortmund, because he was terrorised by Pulisic. He was pretty terrorised by Dembele when he decided to go on that wing as well. And they can't have that happen again, because if they allow Dortmund to get into a rhythm with a bit more rest, with a bit more concentration on the game, obviously with what happened, they could quite easily score 3 goals. But if they sit tight and they work with what they've got, I thought, like you've mentioned as well, Moutinho played better in this game than he did in that Coupe de la Ligue final, and that's a positive, because if they can move Bakayoko to more like what Fabinho does, or at least tell him to be like that, that might be a positive. So if that's the important one, I think we all agree that Amami Toure is a decent enough cover for Sidibe, if not possibly a better defender anyway. So while he'll be a miss in an attacking sense. With this sort of game on the line, having Torre will be fine. But I'm skeptical on Raji unless they play either Diarra instead of him, or they would have to play him in front of him because they can't risk leaving him that exposed again.
All right, I think that certainly sums things up nicely. So we will be, of course, all over this match next Thursday to break things down. I think that we're in for another enthralling night of football, hopefully without as much issues surrounding the match as we had last time. So now turning briefly to the other French team in European action, that is Lyon, who hosted Besiktas tonight. And of course, their match also wasn't without incident, as Turkish fans were throwing things onto the pitch and forcing under the fans below them, Lyon fans below them, forcing the fans onto the pitch. The start of the match was delayed by about 45 minutes. No word yet on what potential sanctions Besiktas and or their fans might face, but certainly unsavory to see and does nothing to enhance the already poor reputation of Turkish fans in Europe. I remember reading an article, if you look on my Twitter, I have a link there to an article The New Yorker wrote about Besiktas fans and fan culture, and it's really a pretty harsh reality and pretty eye-opening. If you want to have a read, I do recommend that. But to the game itself, I guess Adam and Nathan were otherwise occupied. Nathan was able to catch the second half, correct?
Yes.
Nathan and Adam are Manchester United fans. We can give them a pass on this one. They're for being derelict in their journalistic duties. I, of course, am a Lyon fan, so I watched the entire match. I guess for me, what was a little bit frustrating, Lyon won 2-1 again, or perhaps a bit fortuitous to get that result. They were really poor from set pieces, which you don't like to see. Again, Besiktas have a very big and physical team. Atiba Hutchinson, the two center backs, a lot of players who are 6'2", 6'3". Even Talisca is 6'3" as well. Cenk Tosun, the striker, is a very powerful physical presence. So Lyon definitely were going to be at odds in terms of set pieces. So that necessarily didn't necessarily surprise me, especially considering how good Talisca's deliveries are. But I think what frustrated me more than that, I mean, it's you never like to see your team look shaky and concede from set pieces. What frustrated me more is the way that Lyon set up tactically. A 4-2-3-1 with Corentin Tolisso partnering Lucas Toussaint is nominally a very positive formation. It's very attacking. It had Valbuena on the left, Fekir behind Lacazette, and Rachid Ghezal on the right. But I don't think that it afforded Lyon enough protection through the middle of the park. It didn't allow Corentin Tolisso to get forward like he should do and like he should affect the match. I think that they should have opted for a 4-3-3 with Toussaint sitting deepest and one of Sergi Darder or Jordan Ferry partnering Tolisso. Now, I know that Darder has been sort of a non-entity since his arrival, but Jordan Ferry has been an important player for this team in the past. I know he's not as tactically sound and he's a little bit hot-headed, especially on an occasion like this. But I do believe that he has enough genuine box-to-box quality for a match of this magnitude to be successful. I think that Lyon should have gone for a 4-3-3, probably playing Nabil Fekir on the right and Valbuena on the left. Now, why I say this is that Ghezal, he can be a good solution, but in a 4-2-3-1, especially with Valbuena switching flanks like he was and Fekir cutting inside as well, and like I said, drifting, with three players playing a free role, you really need someone to be approaching that match as a more orthodox wide player. And Lyon didn't have that until Cornet came on early in the second half. And I think that each of those players, each of the quartet of players, that is Ghezal, Fekir, Lacazette, and Valbuena, are also sublimely talented with the ball at their feet, but they also need space in which to work. And if they're all trying to cut inside at the same time, you're afforded a natural lack of width on one hand, and also, because I mentioned that Besiktas were playing without an orthodox left back. Adriano was on the pitch, but he was playing as a left winger to start the match. Lyon weren't able to take advantage of the space that they could have been afforded in wider areas from Besiktas, and they basically, in playing players that so many players that wanted to cut inside, allowed Besiktas to sit deep and be compact and soak up the pressure, and it almost worked. So I think that, again, a 4-2-3-1 because of the personnel may nominally be more positive, but a 4-3-3 in terms of creating space for players, I think would have been really impressive. I also think that Ghazal offered next to no protection for poor Raphael. I know Raphael's a bit of a hothead, but I do think that a lot of the battles he got into were often due to being afforded very little protection. And had Ferry been used in that role, I think that Leon would have looked a little bit sharper. So that's my take on the match. Well done to Leon. I want them to win, but again, it's just more fuel for the fire that Genesian needs to go in this summer. He still, from match to match, doesn't understand how to get the best out of this team. So Nathan, the second half that you did see, talk to me about that. How did Leon look to you? Probably better than they looked to me because I'd seen the first half.
Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
No. Were they lucky to get the result, or did they deserve it for the way that they had adapted?
I think from at least what I saw in the second half, they probably deserved at least a draw, and they've nicked the win, haven't they, from a little bit of a absolutely appalling goalkeeping from the Besiktas goalkeeper. I have absolutely no idea what he's done. But from the reports I've seen in the second half, the first half at least, it was Besiktas being physical, which is what I expected to get in and about it. They nicked a goal through Ryan Babel and they sat on it, and I'm not surprised by that. But credit to Leon that they not only grew into the game and really put a lot of pressure on Besiktas. Besiktas barely got out of their own half in the second half, really. And that was a factor of, and like you mentioned, I thought bringing Ghazal off was the trigger. Bringing him off because he was a little bit of a non-entity, brought Cornet on. That also seemed to free up Valbuena even more, who was excellent in the second half. I thought Tolisso was very good as well and deserved his goal. They started playing quicker. They started creating chances and dangerous chances at that. They maybe should have scored a couple more. There was Lacazette going around the goalkeeper and bits like that. He was a little bit poor, really. In all honesty, it wasn't, one of his best performances. But no, I thought they probably just about deserved to squeak it, simply because they were so dominant in that second half as it got further and further on. Besiktas seemed to tire. They seemed to sit further and further back and allow the pressure to build on. And yeah, they nicked it. It was as competitive a game as I expected it to be. I mentioned on our podcast that I wasn't sure Besiktas were this kind of team to lay down and maybe give Leon an easy ride. And the real positive for Leon, and it's a strange thing to say because it was disgusting what we saw at the start of the game, the fact that it's probably going to be a stadium closure in the return leg is an enormous boost for Leon, an absolute blessing almost. I think if they grab a goal in Turkey, that game's over. And fair enough, they deserved the win tonight, I think, for their second half performance, and they've got a real chance of progressing now.
I'd have to agree with that. Adam, anything for you to add on the match, or?
I think Nathan's right. If there is a stadium closure second leg, that's huge for Leon, given how vociferous and how overbearing sort of the crowd is at Besiktas. It would be almost a goal in Leon's favour. It's that pronounced the support they get. So as unfortunate as tonight's incidents were, I think it may work out for Leon to some extent if they're in a roundabout sort of way if they do get that stadium closure, because I'd fancy them to go through if that's the case. And they've got away with one tonight a little bit, have scored 2 late goals. Besiktas are a good team and a very physical side and have done really well to push Leon that far. But I think overall Leon are the better side, and I'd fancy them to go through in the second leg.
All right. So yeah, an overall positive week for the teams on the pitch from Liga and in Europe, but certainly we don't like to see some of the events that surrounded those matches.
Absolutely.
So hopefully all goes well in Besiktas and all goes well in Monaco, regardless of what happens on the pitch. So moving on now to Ligue 1, we are heading into Matchday 33, and it is crunch time, and there are several interesting ties this week, or interesting matches this week. Just a brief update on our standings. Adam did gain some ground on me. It's not over yet. He's maybe the Spurs to my Chelsea. I've got 76. Adam has 67, and Nathan has 60. Nathan, I'm not going to...
Arsenal at least.
I was going to say, I'm not going to draw the analogy there. I'll let you. So just 3 matches to look at this week. An absence of really compelling matches, but there are a couple. start with Angers hosting PSG tomorrow. Adam, PSG are without Thiago Silva, Levin Kurzawa, and Angers have looked really sharp of late, both in their Coupe de France win and versus Monaco. They were perhaps a little bit unlucky not to get anything out of that match. They've won 7 of 10 in all competitions. So what's given this team a jump start in the last couple months?
I think it's a number of factors. As I've mentioned on the pod a number of times, I love Angers. They're for them and Toulouse are probably my favourite teams in the league. I think Moulin has done an incredible job getting them promoted and then creating this effective and aggressive and sort of very compelling team to watch. They keep the ball brilliant in midfield. And Ndoye Mangani and Santa Maria, who's coming to replace Roman Saiz, who was very good last season before moving to Wolves, those three in particular have been absolutely brilliant since returning since Ndoye turned for the African Nations Cup and since Christmas. They've really looked like the Angers we had last season when they were sort of third at Christmas and pushing for a European place for much of that campaign. I think what's really changed them though is a couple of things. First of all, they lost a lot of players to the African Nations Cup. Ndoye, the Haydu, who's their top scorer, Carl Toko Ekambi, who's been really good for them this season, Nicola Pepe as well is very good off the bench and perhaps would play more if there wasn't sort of a bit of furore surrounding his possible transfer. So getting them back from the African Nations Cup was a big boost. And also I think the players returning, plus Jonathan Bamba, who's come in and done surprisingly well, given he was a little bit anonymous in League Two, looked really good at Saint-Etienne when he sort of broke through, perhaps, chances were limited, but looked exciting. And he's come in and sort of made that position on the left-hand side his own to some extent. So I think, a boost in terms of squad, sort of the quality of their squad compared to what it was in January when they looked at their worst this season. But compare them to this sort of last 10 games to perhaps sort of the first 10 or 15 games. I don't know that in terms of performances, they've improved too much. I think they were very unlucky in certain games and perhaps conceded silly goals at the wrong times and earlier in the season. They still were playing really well, I thought, and were unlucky to be sort of down in the bottom 5 for much of the sort of that first half of the season. So I think it's a combination of their squad sort of getting that boost of players returning and a couple of nice sort of boosted signings. Bamba coming in at fullback as well, the other Bamba, Abdoulaye Bamba as well, shored up that position a little bit as well. And Beauregard's a decent option off the bench, scored in that quarter final win against Bordeaux. So they've got reinforcements, but in terms of actual performances, I think they've been much better than perhaps their results suggest this year. Their first 11 in particular, those three I mentioned, De Haydu and Toko Ekambi obviously as well, but defensively, even though they've perhaps in the middle parts they had a little bit of ups and downs, Traore and Tamara still very, very good defensively and have been for long stretches this year. They've just sort of got the rub of the green in recent games, and it's sort of the momentum's built a little bit. So I think overall they've actually had a very good season, and perhaps although we at one point we were thinking they're going to go down, they were unlucky to be in that position. So I think if they got the rub of the green this season for a longer stretches, I think they could be top 8, but which was unfortunate from their point of view. So I think they're a very, very good team and underrated in Ligue 1. And I think if they keep their squad together next season, if they can put that sort of form together again, who says they can't finish in the top half, top 8, maybe even challenge for Europe again? I think they're a very good team, and they've really showed it in the last 10 games. So let's hope it keeps going.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, and I wouldn't disagree with any of that. I think they're only, and some of their losses have been really narrow too. Thinking about that loss to Nantes recently.
Yeah.
Give them another 6 points, and they're very much in the mix for Europe. Be interesting to see what they can do. So, what then would be your prediction for the score, Adam?
Last season it was 0-0. I'm going to say 0-0 again.
All right, Nathan.
2-1 PSG.
All right. I will go. With a 1-1 draw, making things very difficult for PSG to catch Monaco for that title. But now, Nathan, coming on to you, to a team that has been rapidly improving in 2017. Let's take a look at a side that's been among Ligue 1's worst. I'm sorry, Rich Allen, ahead of time here. Rennes have won just once this year. Obviously, the departures of the three wingers, that's Grosicki, Pedro Enrique, and Paul-Georges Intep, have been a problem, given how much those players were relied upon for scoring and creativity. But given how loath this club is to spend as well as the injury record of Johan Gorkuf, who is so important to their system. Joris Nagnon's another one who's been linked with a move away. Benoit Costil is almost certainly gone. Could a relegation be a real worry for this team next year, Nathan?
Maybe. I don't think you can rule it completely out. They had about 3 rebuilds under Philippe Montagnier, and none of them worked. And now they seem to be middling in nowhere land is probably the best way to put it. They just have no thrust about them up front at all. They lost Grosicki. Pedro Enrique was much less of a loss than the other two, and Tep, obviously. And they just have nothing going forward at sometimes. And they look bereft of ideas when they go forward. The injury record of Gorkuf has obviously inflicted that as well. But they just... I don't know what's going on, really. Diakabe's maybe not played enough, but at the same time, he's not stepped up. When we mentioned when those left that he needed to be the man that really went with it because he had the talent. The strikers, Sio and Said, are just wafering is probably the best way to put it. They never seem to look like... If you don't feed Sio the ball, he's just not going to do anything at all. And he's just not going to create on his own. He's not going to hold the line up on his own. He's not really going to test in behind much either. I don't know what he does, really. And then you start looking back at from there and you think the midfield isn't too bad. I think Andre's a good player and there's something to go there. And the defence sometimes, like against Leon, was really, really excellent. Nyanyon is a great player. I don't think he leaves this summer. I think he probably just stays, and that might just be enough. But they need to have a long, hard look at themselves, and Christian Gorkuf especially, who everyone was waiting to sign in the summer, it seemed. Everyone was looking at him from Nice to Nantes to the ones who eventually got him, Rennes. And he's not done anything this season, in all honesty. He's not inspired them. He's not created anything different. They've not missed a load of players. Yes, his son would have been a good addition, and when he has played, he's been good. But you have to worry that time after time after time with Rennes, even when they have spent money, they've missed the mark, which makes you think that even if they do a little bit of a rebuild in the summer, are they going to spend that money wisely? Is Gorkuf going to build the right side for him? I don't know. And I'm a little bit worried about them. You're right. And Costil going he's out of contract in the summer, isn't he? I'm right in saying that.
Yes.
Yeah. So losing him for free is dreadful. I think that any club that loses a player of that caliber without either agreeing for him to sign on and get the money, or why didn't they sell him in the winter? In the summer. But you let it go that long, then you risk this as smaller clubs. That losing a player that you could probably have got 10 million for him, I think, in the summer. I don't think that's an argument. I think that's maybe probably selling him down a little bit because he can be a really, really good goalkeeper. But you take the money you can. Now they're getting nothing. That's pretty embarrassing, especially when they can't reinvest that. And poor Rich Allen's probably in for a world of pain again, probably next season, if something drastic doesn't change and Gorkuf takes this team by the scruff of the neck and really changes it.
Yeah, it's certainly frustrating to see, especially with the way they had been in contention for Europe, even the Champions League last year, down to the last few days of the season, only to sort of cough things up at the end. And for Costil, I don't know. I see him as being a very inconsistent goalkeeper. But I think certainly one who can help a team in Ligue 1. He's been linked with Marseille, for example. I think there's a number of other teams that are in and around that area that could use perhaps a younger upgrade, maybe to Bordeaux. Cedric Carrasco is getting on a little bit now, and I don't think those young keepers are quite ready to take up that mantle. So yeah, I certainly think that he's still ready to help somebody at or on the European level of play. So Nathan, what would be your score prediction for their hosting Lille on Saturday?
Don't watch this game. No.
All right, I think out of the multiplex, that's not going to be one I'd pick. I'd probably go for Montpellier, Lorient myself. I'll go with a 1-0 Lille win. Adam?
1-0 for me.
None of us are very optimistic about the goal scoring chances in that match then. We are running a little bit long, but there is still one more match I'd like to deal with. It is the weekend's Grand Choc, as they call it, the big match in France. That's Sunday evening from 8 o'clock UK, and that's Marseille hosting Saint-Etienne. Adam, you will be in our Guardian column this week writing about Christophe Galtier.
Indeed.
Perhaps you can give us a bit of a preview of that, what you're thinking in terms of his relationship and his role in the team, and what the future looks like for him.
Yeah, I think it's something we talked a bit about on the pod at times this season, that this is a bit of a make or break season for Gautier particularly, and Saint-Etienne as a club in general. As I said before, they're a historic and prestigious team in France. They're one of I think they hold their sort of joint they've got 10 Ligue 1 or titles, which is joint record holders, and they have ambitions to be challenging for at least Champions League places again, and they have done so under Gautier. Gautier took them over. They were fighting against relegation, and he's very swiftly taken them from the bottom third of the table to the top quarter, to the top 5, and done a really fantastic job. Results-wise, you can't fault him at all. He's been absolutely brilliant for Saint-Etienne, and they look like over the past sort of five years or so, he's been there 7. A genuine challenger for European places and Champions League places, and have been unlucky not to get into Champions League qualifying rounds at times in recent years. But I think his tenure at the club has come to a point where he's taken them perhaps as far as he can. He's reached a bit of a ceiling, and it's perhaps grown a little bit stale for him at Saint-Etienne. Not for any fault of his own, not for any fault of anyone in particular, perhaps, but I think it's just come to the point where both he and the club perhaps need a change. They're down in 7th at the moment. They do traditionally finish relatively well, so there's still a little bit of hope for them there, but I think they would have been expected to be not making but challenging for that Champions League spot again this year. They expect to progress every year, so to be at least Europa League groups knockout stages, which they were, but perhaps they were last season as well, and there wasn't too much progress there. Obviously, they're not going to fancy themselves against Man United. Perhaps there's a little bit of get out for Gautier there, that they weren't expected to win that game, but they're also expected to be challenging for top 4 or 5 places in the league. And in 7th, albeit with a game in hand, which is against Monaco, not the easiest of games, 3 points off Marseille, 4 off Bordeaux. Those 2 teams look much stronger and perhaps are in better form than Saint-Etienne. So there's a chance that they finish 7th and don't make Europe this year at all, which is probably what will happen. So it comes to the summer, and it's sort of, has Gautier on a personal level, does he need to look for another challenge? Are there other clubs out there that would suit him and perhaps require his rather sort of direct and sort of unique set of skills? His skill set is very defensive, very pragmatic coach, but he gets results, and that's very worthwhile. And perhaps Saint-Etienne, they need a change as well. That sort of pragmatic defensive approach has become ingrained at the club a little bit, and at least from my observations of Ligue 1 over the last 2 or 3 years working at Football Radar, is that they're kind of ubiquitously boring. They're good, but they don't excite, and it's sort of become a little bit stale for them. So perhaps they might also be thinking that it's time for a change and a new direction for them. So if they really don't, at least tread water this season and make the Europa League again, then I think for both parties it might be best to move on. And this game on Sunday night will be a big, pointer in that sort of struggle, if you like. If they win, they go level 1 points with Marseille. They've got a better goal difference. They go up into 6th. That's a huge result for them, and they're back in the running. But lose and they're 6 points behind Marseille. Say Bordeaux win as well, they could be not out of the race, but really struggling to make the top 6. So it's a big game for them, and perhaps a big game for Gautier's tenure at the club. It could be one of his last games in charge.
All right, Nathan, I wanted to bring you in on this as well. If Saint-Etienne win here, and they do have a game in hand, they could be as much as 3 points ahead of Marseille. But to you, I would ask, is their season as bad as some people would make it out, or is it luck? They have injuries to just about every single one of their important players has missed some chunk of time out. And they've also really disappointed in the domestic cups, losing to Auxerre, and I want to say Nancy in the League Cup. Does that sound right to you guys?
I think so, yeah. That rings a bell.
Yeah.
But in any event, not to the heavyweights of France in those encounters. And they had a tough draw in the Europa League against Manchester United. So what's your take on this, Nathan? Is it a matter of bad luck, or are things just really that stale under Gaultier?
I think you make a good point in the sense that yes, it was a tough draw in something like the Europa League for them. They had a relatively difficult group. They then got a relatively difficult, well, a very difficult for them at least, next round match against Manchester United that they just never really, especially in the second leg, rose to the occasion. They were decent in the first leg, but at the same time, there's injuries to most of these key players, but most of them have spent a good amount of time, and there's just a real staleness about the squad. I mean, I was just looking through it a moment ago, and especially in midfield, Pajot, Clement, Dabo, Cornier, Saive, Vertu, Selnes, Lemoine. Does any of those really excite you? I mean, none of them have really set the world alight. In the past, Vertu's been exciting. In the past, Dabo's been decent, but Dabo's played 14 matches and had 1 assist. Vertu's had 28 games, scored 3 goals, had 3 assists. It's not good enough. It's not good enough from the forward players. Nolan Roux is a classic can't score enough goals striker. You've never been able to score enough goals. Why he's still employed by this football team or most football teams in Liga as a potential starter, I don't understand it. Sutherland's been a real disappointment. Beric, injury problems have maybe held him back a little bit, but still, he's missed a number of really, really simple chances. And then you look at the wide players. Humumu's had an average season. He's their top scorer with 6. And that really tells you everything else. The most everyone else has got is 4 after that. They just really lack an imagination when they play football. Everything is rigid, and now teams are starting to find them out. Now they have had injuries. It's been a lot more simpler for teams to score upon them. And I think Pogba's been a relatively decent miss as well. He's missed quite a fair amount of time. Him and Perrin make a real difference. But that can't be an excuse anymore. I don't think they've been good enough. There's a real staleness about the squad. It needs some excitement in the summer. They need to buy some exciting players in through it. It's nice that someone like Ronel Pierre Gabriel recently. He's been a really exciting player and played really well in the last couple of games. He looks like an exciting prospect. That kind of thing helps, but they just don't have anything in those attacking areas. And like Adam said, it makes them so boring sometimes to watch and stale. And it's such a shame because fans of that club are fantastic. And the noise they made against Manchester United in that second leg was, it blew the socks off of half those Manchester United players. Imagine that crowd if they had an exciting team again. It would be electric, and it makes another team in Liga, even though they might not have the financial means to compete. They have that crowd. If they have a bit more excitement, they could be back up there because they still have some fantastic players. Perrin, Ruffier, if he stays, and bits like that. They've got some interesting players that they can start building around. But something needs to happen this summer, and I agree with Adam. I think it starts with Galtier and maybe a new, fresh approach.
Yeah, I think that Jorginho is another one we can look to. Arnaud Nordin's looked exciting at times. Dylan Saint-Louis, who's out on loan with, I believe, Tours in Ligue 2, is another player who looked very bright when he was with the club before he was loaned earlier in the season. So there's certainly things to grasp onto there, but I would have to concur with you, gentlemen, and I think a more attack-minded manager might be a better fit for this club, a better way to bring them forward. That does our score predictions for this match before I forget. I will go with a 1-1 draw. I don't think either of these teams have been in great attacking form, but they've been decent defensively. Adam?
0-0 for me.
Okay. And Nathan?
1-0 Marseille.
All right. That is all for this week. For Nathan Staples and Adam White, I've been Eric Devin. Please do join us again next week at our regular time. Again, we usually start from 2200, 10 p.m. UK, not quite so late. Thanks for staying up with us, and be sure to follow us on Twitter at GFFN and visit our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com for all the latest news and views from around the world of French football. Thank you, and have a pleasant evening.